If war breaks out in Europe, I think that this country should heed the advice of its first president and avoid all foreign entanglements.
I haven't the slightest idea of European affairs.
In the event of war in Europe, I think we should stay out of it entirely.
And all our efforts should be made to keep out of the fight.
Let Europe fight her own battles.
When the storm clouds were really starting to gather over Europe, 1937 and 38, movie studios, each one had kind of a different reaction because they wanted to be very careful about their relationships with Germany because they were distributing movies there. So they did not want to lose that money. But then as Germany was expanding its power and Hitler was rising, they had to object because they knew that the United States eventually, despite the fact that the public was not for it, would in fact be getting involved in what was obviously going to turn into a major war in Europe.
No studio was more supportive of the American war effort than 20th Century Fox. Established in 1935 by the merger of 20th Century Pictures and Fox Film Corporation, the studio was the brainchild of Darryl Francis Zanuck, the production chief and co-founder whose control over movie content was absolute.
Things had gotten so touchy with the studios that in 1938, there was a general meeting with Darryl Zanuck and Louis B. Mayer and Harry Cohn and Jack Warner and Adolf Zukor and all the Sam Goldwyn, Selznick. They were all there to discuss what do we do about Europe. And Joseph Kennedy, the father of John F. Kennedy, who had been one of the original investors in RKO Radio Pictures and was now an ambassador to Europe, came to them and said, gentlemen, there is a way to do this, but we need to de-emphasize the use of Jewish movie stars and Jewish names of producers. Well, 90% of all of these producers and studio heads were Jewish immigrants. They were flabbergasted that Kennedy actually even made this suggestion. Darryl Zanuck was not among those who would have been affected by this because he was from Wahoo, Nebraska. But he was outraged.
DFZ, as he became known, was unique among Hollywood moguls as he was a movie maker first and a businessman second. A whirling dervish as a screenwriter and producer, Zanuck became head of production at Warner Brothers at the tender age of 23 before founding 20th Century Films with Joseph Schenck in 1934. Zanuck knew war was coming and prepared accordingly.
20th Century Fox is more than an institution. We are all united in one common work, the work of making 20th Century Fox the outstanding company in the moving picture industry, and we will succeed.
20th Century Fox slowly, very slowly, started to do films that had the theme of anti-fascism. Their first, really, actually, surprisingly, were the Charlie Chan movies.
Missouri-born actor Sidney Toler portrayed the Asian detective who was seemingly on perpetual leave from the Honolulu Police Department.
20th Century Fox had made Charlie Chan at the Olympics, and in fact it had been set at the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Charlie Chan goes to Germany on the Hindenburg, and when they shot the footage, what they had to do was then mat out all the swastikas that decorated the dirigible. And so you see actual footage of the Olympics from that time period. And so here it is in a Charlie Chan movie, this record of fascism. Of course, this is the very famous Olympics where Jesse Owens beat the German contenders.
In 1939's City in Darkness, Chan foils a Paris-based smuggling ring sending arms to Germany, while in Charlie Chan in Panama, He stopped saboteurs from blowing up the Panama Canal.
This council wants you immediately to arrange police details for tonight.
Oh, Paris will need it. With the city in darkness, what a holiday this will be for crime. I'm sorry, Charlie, but this puts an end to our evening together.
Perhaps can meet later.
I'll phone you.
Now, this is 1938, and the situation in Europe had gotten much worse. And this is about Charlie Chan as a World War I veteran who goes to Paris to discuss the Munich Accord that Chamberlain was negotiating. And Charlie Chan issues this very stern warning that, just like with World War I, absolutely none of these countries that are agreeing to cooperate with each other are going to cooperate. And this whole thing is going to explode. That was 20th Century Fox's statement up to that point. Warner Brothers was the studio that went further. Edward G. Robinson had majorly campaigned to make the film Confessions of a Nazi Spy, and to really touch on this about saboteurs in the United States and chasing them down and the infiltration of fascism. This was big stuff.
You'd think from the number of spies they've been sending over here that we're at war with Germany.
It looks more as if Germany were at war with us. Nazi boons meeting all over the nation, openly training men for street fights, teaching them how to use guns and bayonets. It's a new kind of war, but it's still war.
It exposes the danger of fascism and the infiltration of Nazi agents here in the United States. And Warner Brothers kept that up because they did a wonderful movie with Humphrey Bogart called All Through the Night. This is in 1940, and the villains are Nazis.
Coming out foursquare against German aggression and in support of Great Britain, Zanuck gave speeches that let everyone know where he and his studio stood. In September 1941, he spoke at the National Convention of the American Legion, saying, "If you charge us, the studio, with being anti-Nazi, you are right. And if you accuse us of producing films in the interest of preparedness and national defense, again, you are right."
This was all before our official entry into the war. This is before Pearl Harbor. This is if you will, a precursor. And these studios were in fact at least taking a stand and not caring so much about the box office overseas, which was soon going to be cut off completely because of the conflict.
I've anticipated the pleasure of meeting you for years. I'm afraid I don't know. Like you, my dear Thorndyke, I've had but one passion in life, and that is the hunting of big game.
In June 1941, Fox released Manhunt, a thriller directed by Fritz Lang, who left Germany after the Nazis came to power in 1933. Based on a novel, the suspense film has a British big game hunter played by Walter Pidgeon stalking Adolf Hitler, either for sport or to assassinate him.
I'm afraid of the city, afraid of people I can't see.
Where can you go if you can't get out of England?
To a place where I can be invisible and they can't.
In April 1941, Zanuck began producing The Eagle Flies Again, headed by two of his studio's biggest stars, Tyrone Power and Betty Grable. Based on Zanuck's original story, written under his favored pseudonym of Melville Crossman, it was released in October 1941 as A Yank in the RAF.
He did something that would never occur to you. Something you couldn't even understand. He asked me to marry him.
So that's what's bothering you. Well, why didn't you say so? If you really want to get married, I'll marry you.
It was directed by Henry King, who was in many ways almost the Michael Curtiz of 20th Century Fox. He was, at the time, Fox's true big house director. Henry Hathaway coming up behind, but Henry King had just done Jesse James. Henry King would do The Song of Bernadette. Henry King also would direct 12 O'Clock High.
The film sandwiched a dramatic romantic triangle of Power, Grable, and John Sutton in a story of Power's egocentric pilot joining the Royal Air Force in an attempt to lure ex-girlfriend Grable away from the affections of flight instructor Sutton. The romantic plot perspective doesn't detract from the dramatic seriousness of the war as Germany overruns the Low Countries in France while raining bombs on England. The film concludes with both pilots participating in the Dunkirk evacuation as England takes on Germany alone.
Betty Grable, I don't think, has ever been more appealing than she is in this film. And it is Thai power, it is grinning best. Of course, the film takes a dark turn, but it is, if you will, kind of the model for 20th Century Fox, what I would call their rah-rah movies, where they would celebrate a branch of the service. And in this case, of course, it's the Royal Air Force.
Zanuck received extraordinary cooperation from the British government, who recognized the propaganda value of this celluloid salute to the RAF. Lord Beaverbrook, the British Air Minister, was consulted about the story and, quote, expressed the wish that the comedy and romance might lift the film out of the usual category of war plots. According to studio publicity, studio cameraman Otto Kenturek and his assistant Jack Perry went to England to film airplane fight sequences and were shot down and killed during a dogfight between RAF and German flyers. A Yank in the RAF was Fox's second biggest grosser for 1941, trailing only How Green Was My Valley, the classic film that won the Best Picture Oscar for Zanuck.
'20th Century Fox decided to put Laurel and Hardy into a movie called Great Guns. Now, Laurel and Hardy had been put under contract to Fox basically so that they could be Fox's Abbott and Costello. The producer on their films was a man named Saul Wurtzel, who was a B-picture producer at Fox, but there's a very famous saying, at the studio lot, you've gone from bad to Wurtzel. And the Laurel and Hardy films at Fox are dreadful. And to try and equate them with Abbott and Costello was a gigantic mistake.
What's that? Sounds like an Oregon woodpecker.
No, an Oregon woodpecker makes a much softer sound. That's more like the Tennessee woodpecker that thrives on hickory.
Along with Harry Warner, Nicholas Schenck, and other movie executives, Zanuck was questioned specifically about Manhunt and other anti-Nazi movies by Senator Worth Clark of Idaho during a Senate investigation into motion picture war propaganda in September 1941. This investigation was initiated by a group of isolationist anti-war senators led by Clark and Gerald Nye of North Dakota. The overwrought Clark absurdly claimed the film industry was, quote, determined to wreak vengeance on Adolf Hitler by plunging this nation into war on behalf of another ferocious beast, close quote. As it turned out, the senators hadn't even watched the movies they were castigating the film moguls about. Zanuck, Warner, and the others didn't have to try very hard to make the senators out to be misguided fools. After Pearl Harbor, the Senate isolationists, who did represent a significant portion of the anti-war sentiment in the country, ran for cover.
There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
When America entered the war, one of the things that happened almost immediately was that the government knew that movies would be so important, not only for morale, but for training purposes and everything else under the sun. And they enlisted the aid of the heads of the studios, making them instantly commissioned officers. Jack Warner became a colonel. Darryl Zanuck did also. Now, here was the big difference between Zanuck and someone like Jack Warner. Darryl Zanuck had served in World War I, and in fact, had lied about his age, the age of 15, to get into the Signal Corps with the Army so he could serve in France.
As a company runner carrying messages to advanced positions in France and Belgium, Zanuck saw death in combat up close and personal. He quickly learned war was something to be avoided at all costs, but if there was no alternative but war, halfway measures wouldn't cut it.
He was the real deal. He was a very gung-ho. He was kind of a macho guy, very famous on his 50th birthday. He did one-armed chin-ups on a bar in a restaurant just to prove to everybody they could still do it. And of course, he was very famous for being so aggressive and so skilled on the polo field, and always had his polo mallet in script conferences and things like that. But Zanuck did not want to be what he saw as a paper soldier.
20th Century Fox began churning out war movies akin to a celluloid arsenal of democracy. To the Shores of Tripoli, 1942, so titled after a lyric in the U.S. Marine Corps hymn, featured a young John Payne paired with the red-headed queen of Technicolor, Maureen O'Hara. Lamar Trotty's screenplay depicts the tried-and-true Hollywood romantic dramatics, with Payne as a smart-aleck recruit vying for Navy nurse O'Hara, but is taught a lesson by drill instructor Randolph Scott, who ends up with Nancy Kelly.
Sergeant, will you explain to Private Winters that as a Navy nurse I hold rank equivalent to a lieutenant, and that I should be addressed at all times in the same manner as a commissioned officer?
A lieutenant?
And that he should state his business as briefly and in as businesslike a manner as possible.
Yes, ma'am. I'll impress it on him so there'll be no further misunderstanding.
Like a Yank in the RAF, To the Shores of Tripoli was crafted by 20th Century Fox contract people. H. Bruce Humberstone, who specialized in musicals, directed it beautifully.
The patriotic climax has Payne donning his Marine uniform and shipping out to fight after hearing the news about Pearl Harbor attack over the radio.
And it was another, if you will, salute to a branch of the armed services. But this was, at this point, the Fox formula. Like everybody else, they wanted to boost civilian morale and get fellows down to the recruiting station so they would volunteer, and also make sure everybody was going directly to their draft boards. And that was the purpose of the movies, and they succeeded.
All America is thrilled today as never before by the heroic deeds of the United States Marines. On land, sea, and in the air, their audacious displays of courage have won the admiration of everyone.
Edward Kronjager and William V. Scal received Academy Award nominations for their color cinematography, and another big moneymaker for Fox, To the Shores of Tripoli, made $3 million in 1942.
Of the amusement industry's total manpower, a high percentage is now serving in the armed forces. Every branch of show business has contributed its white-collar men, technicians, and skilled artisans in answer to the call to arms.
Unlike Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox really only had one truly significant male star at this point when World War II broke out, and that was Tyrone Power. Tyrone Power enlisted in the Marines, and he started at the very bottom and worked his way up and became a decorated flyer. He was able to jump in and finish some movies, but then when he was gone, he was gone. And this really affected 20th Century Fox because they did not have a stable of name male actors to step in. So many of these guys, John Payne, George Montgomery, were in the service, and they kind of would manipulate their time so that they would get their movie commitments out of the way, and then they were gone.
Obviously, you're not pilots, and I doubt if you're very good mechanics.
There must be something around here that we can do.
Sure, Major. There's thousands and thousands of guys like you and I that want to do something to serve their country. Maybe we haven't got training, but we're willing to try. Honestly, we'll try hard, too. It all don't mean nothing if you don't give us this chance. After all, our heart's in the right places.
The studio that was kind of nailing, if you will, World War II from one perspective was Universal. And they took a factory approach to what they were doing. It was literally like a defense plant, but what they made were movies. And they had Abbott and Costello, and they had the Andrews Sisters, and they had the horror films, and all of these things that were done very quickly, on a schedule, black and white, to fulfill a need across the country, not only for military bases, but there was also the reality of movie theaters were showing films at 2 o'clock in the morning for people who were just getting off of work, working at Lockheed, and their shift is over, their sleep schedule is completely changed. They wanted to go to the movies.
Theater ticket sales doubled from under 20 million in 1939 to over 39 million weekly admissions by 1944. Many of whom had loved ones headed out to fight and possibly die. The diversion of going to the movies became essential.
Now, before 1940, Darryl Zanuck had made the dictum that he did not want any more series films at 20th Century Fox. So he sold Charlie Chan to Monogram, got rid of Mr. Moto, and unfortunately sold Sherlock Holmes to Universal. The war breaks out, and what does Universal do? They turn Sherlock Holmes loose in modern day London fighting the Nazis. It was a masterstroke. Zanuck and Fox missed out on that opportunity. So they were always trying to kind of, I think, play catch up a little bit within their B unit, because without the major male stars, they needed product. So they are focusing, of course, on spy adventures, newspaper headline stories, which, of course, had been Darryl Zanuck's great specialty.
So, you are the enemy. Oh, I am not supposed to laugh. You've heard that the Japanese do not show their feelings, nor do I have big teeth and thick glasses. How sad to disillusion you, and how easy. Easy because you do not know the Japanese. You only think you do.
Japan was increasingly viewed as an adversarial threat. From 1942 onward, German and Japanese movie characters were universally characterized as crude, evil stereotypes in keeping with the national mood.
Secret Agent of Japan, Little Tokyo, USA are great examples of that. Now, they both star the same man. They both star Preston Foster, who himself would rise to the rank of captain and then commodore of the United States Coast Guard. So he was another one. He was committed also to the military. But these were action movies about the incursions of Japan. And these were made right after Pearl Harbor.
Secret Agent of Japan was aptly described in a ferocious 1942 Fox press release. Quote, having restrained itself for years while the United States government patiently tried to guide the Japanese from paths of bloody aggression, the motion picture industry was given a release to discuss the Nipponese in the frankest possible manner by the bombs that fell on Pearl Harbor, close quote.
This was, again, who is a Japanese spy? And that, of course, was a theme that was explored in every other studio, naturally, but Fox was doing it this way, and then also on bigger films.
Little Tokyo, USA was produced concurrently with President Franklin Roosevelt's now infamous Executive Order 9066 of February 19, 1942. In one of the most shameful episodes of 20th century American history, the president bowed to war hysteria and racism by authorizing the evacuation of all persons deemed a threat to national security from the West Coast to relocation centers further inland. In the next 6 months, over 100,000 men, women, and children, almost all exclusively of Japanese ancestry, were moved to assembly centers and then shipped to and confined in isolated, fenced, and guarded internment camps for the balance of the war.
In one film, China Girl, you saw a story about the war between China and Japan before the involvement of the United States.
I am sorry if the noise disturbed you. The execution of spies is an essential part of a modern warfare.
Spies, eh? My mistake. I thought they were civilians.
There are no civilians in China.
Before going off to war, Zanuck wrote an original story called China Girl under his Melville Crossman pseudonym. The picture was scripted and produced by the great screenwriter Ben Hecht. Instead of Tyrone Power or Victor Mature, Zanuck cast a young George Montgomery who had worked his way up from playing cowpokes in B movies opposite rising Fox star Gene Tierney.
And George Montgomery is a photographer who is trying to get images from the Burma Road at the time before Pearl Harbor when Japan and China were at war and Claire Chennault's Flying Tigers were bombing the Japanese and engaging them. And remember, that was a civilian outfit. That was not a military outfit. So it was kind of this war among civilians that was all going on before Pearl Harbor and before the United States officially, quote unquote, engaged Japan.
Monty falls in love with Jean Tierney, who is playing a biracial Chinese woman who graduated from Vassar. Yes, this was still Hollywood. But the film's grim ending has Tierney and her father being killed by Japanese bombers as the vengeance-minded Montgomery runs to the roof of a building to shoot down the Japanese planes that murdered his lover.
And Fox thought this was really something that should be discussed because Japan was not some far-off land that suddenly out of the blue just bombed Pearl Harbor. They were involved in conflicts, and we were there.
Many of our elected leaders warned us of danger.
Without a declaration of war and without warning or justification of any kind, civilians, including vast numbers of women and children, are being ruthlessly murdered with bombs from the air.
Zanuck went to England and had befriended Lord Mountbatten, which allowed him, frankly, access to battlefront experience, which these other studio executives were not going to take that chance. And in fact, Jack Warner didn't even leave Burbank.
Zanuck left behind a pile of approved scripts at 20th Century Fox in various stages of pre-production. Running the lot in his absence was William Getz, Louis B. Mayer's son-in-law, who had originally been brought into the Fox executive suite as a sop to Mayer, who provided needed capital and stars when 20th Century merged with Fox in 1935. Getz was not a particularly creative man. Zanuck always likened him to a banker who kept track of the money, or more crudely, an organizational nail with he, Zanuck, swinging the hammer.
And William Getz, who would later run Universal, ran the studio all of the time that the United States was involved in conflicts in Europe and also in the Pacific Theater.
Documentary and industrial filmmakers are furthering the government's plans for the visual education of millions of new workers in war industry and for the training by films of the men of the American Armed Forces.
In 1941, very famously, Washington came to Frank Capra and commissioned him as a colonel to begin a series of movies called Why We Fight. And these became probably the most important documentary propaganda films made during World War II. The very first one, Prelude to War, to show exactly how things were changing in the Pacific Theater and in Europe. The first one was, in fact, distributed by 20th Century Fox, and it won an Academy Award as Best Documentary. It was important that a major studio play this in as many theaters as possible, and Fox and Zanuck took this as a personal responsibility to make sure that this happened. The series got so famous that, in fact, audiences came in droves to see these movies. Now, these were, of course, different than the documentary films that were being made by John Huston, William Wyler, and specifically John Ford.
This is what American paratroopers look like after jumping from a plane at dawn, landing deep in enemy territory, accomplishing their mission, and marching 30 miles overland in full pack under a hot African sun.
Zanuck was promoted to a full colonel in the Signal Corps by order of Army Chief of Staff General George Marshall. Eager for action, he witnessed a British commando raid, then traveled to the Aleutian Islands to make a war documentary on what was going on there, which turned out to be not much of anything. Zanuck was eventually assigned to make a documentary about the pending North African campaign. DFC was not a rear echelon colonel. He stayed near the forefront of combat in North Africa and was frequently under fire. He also bedded down next to soldiers on the front line, although the troops slept on Army-issue blankets while Zanuck snuggled comfortably in an Abercrombie & Fitch padded sleeping bag. Despite being directed by John Ford, his documentary about the North African campaign At the Front was poorly received. Zanuck kept a lively diary of his daily activities that was also published as Tunis Expedition.
John Ford and Darryl Zanuck had a real contentious relationship at times, which isn't surprising given the personality of both men. But Ford's association with Fox went back to the 1920s. Recently, right before the war at Fox, he had made Young Mr. Lincoln, Drums Along the Mohawk, How Green Was My Valley, and most importantly, The Grapes of Wrath. Ford was in the Navy and had gone to Midway Island actually to shoot footage of what he thought was going to be just life on a naval base. And in the middle of all this, the attack came. And Ford grabbed his 16mm camera and filmed the footage that became the very famous Battle of Midway documentary. And in fact, he was injured while he was doing it by a piece of shrapnel. Ford was very worried about this particular project because suddenly everything had changed about it. He showed the reality of the combat. There is some very rough stuff in the Battle of Midway. And he took it and had his film editor, Robert Parrish, put it together secretly, and he arranged for FDR to see the documentary. He didn't want Darryl Zanuck to see it. He did not want anybody from any studio to see it. And FDR watched the film and said, everyone needs to see this movie. Every mother needs to see this film so they know what could happen to their sons. So Ford finally showed the film to Zanuck, and 20th Century Fox distributed it, and the film won Ford his 4th Academy Award.
The Battle of Midway is over. Our front yard is safe, but a big job is still to be done. Day after day, our patrol planes search for survivors. Every tiny coral reef, every distant mile of sea. Search for men who fought to the last round of ammunition and flew to the last drop of gas and then crashed into the sea.
The year 1944 was an extremely profitable one for Fox. As Allied victory approached, the last group of war-themed films were released. Firmly back in the saddle, Zanuck swung a deal with David O. Selznick for the services of director Alfred Hitchcock. The result was Lifeboat, released on January 28, 1944.
Alfred Hitchcock had traditionally stayed very far away from Darryl F. Zanuck and 20th Century Fox. Zanuck's reputation for getting involved in cutting, for getting involved in the script writing process and everything else was too close to Hitchcock's own experiences with David O. Selznick, and he wanted to have the freedom to go ahead and make the movie the way he wanted to make it, which also meant a big financial commitment from the studio. William Getz was then running Fox, Zanuck was overseas, and that was the big motivator for Hitchcock to agree to make the film.
Joe Swirling's screen adaptation of John Steinbeck's novella has the survivors of an Allied freighter attacked by a German submarine trapped together in a lifeboat. An excellent ensemble cast includes Tallulah Bankhead, William Bendix, Walter Slezak, Mary Anderson, John Hodiak, Henry Hull, Hume Cronin, and Canada Lee.
The movie itself is a technical marvel. What Hitch had to do was not only construct a lifeboat, but one that could be maneuvered in different sections, both above and below the water in a tank, which had constant water coming in and out, plus waves, plus rear projection process screens. And it's all beautifully done, but it was a real technical achievement.
Despite the quality of the film, critics complained it was too complimentary to the duplicitous German survivor, Slezak, than the frequently squabbling Allied characters.
It did take, if you will, a neutral perspective so everyone has a voice. Every one of these characters gets to say their piece. And this was wildly misinterpreted as being pro-German. And so when those stories started to come out, that Hitchcock had in fact made a film that was sympathetic to Germany, especially at this point, the public rejected the movie.
Canada Lee also said that his role was reduced by Hitchcock to the stereotypical African-American stock character that was all too frequently seen on movie screens. We should remember that as America fought to free the world of totalitarianism, the armed forces were segregated and would remain so until President Truman ordered the military to be fully integrated in 1948.
Sullivan. Sullivan, number 54.
Come on, we all go in together.
One at a time, Sullivan.
Step aside, buddy.
Listen, you.
Tomorrow you can push us around, sailor boy, but today we're still civilians. Come on.
You heard what the yeoman said. I'll see you men one at a time.
You see, sir, we're the Sullivans. We're brothers, the five of us. We've always been together since we was born, you might say, and that's how we want to go into the Navy.
Yeah, it's like this. We always done our fighting as a kind of team. We Sullivans stick together.
Zanuck returned to his studio in time for the premiere of The Sullivans, a picture retitled as The Fighting Sullivans 2 months after its release in February 1944.
The Fighting Sullivans is an excellent example of, if you will, Fox moving towards a darker perspective of the aspects of the war and heroism.
One of the most tragic American stories during the war occurred due to the sinking of the USS Juneau during the Battle of Guadalcanal. The five Sullivan brothers, George, Francis, Joseph, Madison, and Albert, enlisted in the Navy together and served as sailors aboard the Juneau. All five brothers perished, with the Navy instituting a policy that family members could no longer serve on the same vessel during wartime.
Fighting Sullivans was directed by Lloyd Bacon, who had guided many of the Jimmy Cagney, Pat O'Brien movies at Warner's, and also had directed Knute Rockne, All-American. So he was the perfect guy to bring forth that camaraderie and that feeling of dedicated Irish spirit, what have you. But again, it is melancholy because the Sullivans do not survive.
The film was made with the cooperation of the Navy and the Sullivan family, who acted as technical advisors and shared in the proceeds from the picture.
All five. All five.
The Purple Heart, 1944, was the picture that finally put Dana Andrews at the top of the credits as a Fox star. Based on a story written by Darryl Zanuck, the picture was directed by the great Louis Milestone, whose All Quiet on the Western Front remains one of the all-time great war films. The picture was a fictionalized account based on facts known at the time about the trial of 8 American flyers captured after the April 18, 1942 Doolittle bombing raid on Japan. On April 20th, 1943, the U.S. War Department issued an official statement that the heretofore classified raid had been launched from the USS Hornet and that 8 of the flyers were presumed to be prisoners in Japan.
We were heavily engaged with Japan at this point. This is before the dropping of the atomic bomb. And as Andrews and Sam Levine and his entire crew are condemned to die, Dana Andrews gives a speech about the destruction of Japan, about how the vengeance of the United States against Japan because of what they did at Pearl Harbor is going to be so devastating, and even uses the words fire in his speech. It completely predicts the dropping of the atomic bomb.
Zanuck kept the set for The Purple Heart closed and did not submit the script to the War Department for approval or cooperation. He was prepared to delay the film's release until after the war. On January 27, 1944, the U.S. War and Navy Departments issued an official statement detailing the atrocities committed by the Japanese against thousands of American and Allied prisoners of war after the fall of Bataan and Corregidor. Following the government's official acknowledgement, the War Department lifted its ban and allowed films depicting wartime atrocities to be released. However, they and any atrocities shown on the screen must be documented or at least credible. Due to this statement and the production code censorship requirements zealously enforced by Joe Breen, torture scenes of the flyers in The Purple Heart could not be shown.
We will win this war because we are willing to sacrifice 10 million lives. How many lives is the white man willing to sacrifice?
Nonetheless, The Purple Heart yanked at American patriotic heartstrings with both hands, and in retrospect, Its crude, stereotypical portrayal of Japanese characters appears ludicrous. Many years later, Dana Andrews professed to be embarrassed by some of the jingoistic dialogue, but his climactic courtroom speech remains a memorable instance of superlative screen acting.
The trap has been sprung. Believing us scattered all over the ocean, the main Jap fleet is headed for Midway. They're going in for the kill, and so are we. We're through pulling punches. We're through running away. Our mission is accomplished, and from here on in, we fight.
Wing and a Prayer was one of Fox's last, if you will, tribute films to a branch of the service, and in this case, it was aircraft carriers. They used material that William Wyler had gathered for his documentary, Fighting Lady, and it starred Dana Andrews, and was very well directed by Henry Hathaway.
The film took its title from Harold Adamson and Jimmy McHugh's popular 1943 tune, Coming In on a Wing and a Prayer, that became the military aviator's credo. Originally intended to be a factual account of the Battle of Midway, the film became a tribute to the aircraft carrier or brown shoe Navy set right after Pearl Harbor, when the country is wondering when the Navy would get up off the mat and strike Japan back.
But it took an interesting take as far as recent naval history, because the Battle of the Coral Sea had been a devastating loss for the Navy, and the Battle of Midway had been a victory. So what they were presupposing was that the Battle of the Coral Sea was kind of intentionally botched by the Navy to give the enemy the impression that the U.S. Navy was a lot more disorganized and, if you will, egged the enemy on to engage us, and then when they did, we slaughtered them.
Could have been something else. Could have been the engineers or the tanks. Could have even been the Navy. They looked at me and said, here's a guy that can walk. They finished me all right.
Everybody walks, even monkeys.
There are limits, plenty of limits.
I've been thinking, how long we've been in the Army?
Murder.
Look at Hoskins. He gets a lousy little dig in the leg and he's out of the Army. But he doesn't want to be out of the Army.
Justice.
Where are we going, Rivera?
I am going someplace where I can set up this weapon. Then I'm going to shoot this weapon. I am not going to walk anymore.
There are limits.
Filmed sequentially on Malibu locations was Lewis Milestone's A Walk in the Sun. Based on a novella by Harry Brown, this film was an independent production that was released by Fox.
And it was being financed by Samuel Bronston, who would later become the king of the epics when he went to Spain and made films like Circus World and 55 Days at Peking and El Cid.
A completely different type of war-themed film, A Walk in the Sun provided an up-close view of a combat platoon landing at Salerno, Italy in September 1943 as part of Operation Avalanche, the Allied invasion of Italy. Delivering their line readings in almost blank verse that is interspersed with ballad music is an ensemble of skilled actors, most of whom, with the exception of Dana Andrews and Richard Conte, were relatively unknown.
Richard Conte, Dana Andrews just became this personification of just the regular Joe who found himself in combat, and how does he react? And of course that's true in All Quiet on the Western Front. This was a theme that was very important to Lewis Milestone.
Unlike other war films, A Walk in the Sun is about the day-to-day existence of the combat soldier, the loneliness, boredom, the endless waiting amid constant fear and sudden death. A quote from Harry Brown's novella epitomizes the film and war itself. Quote, "War without virtue itself breeds virtue." Close quote.
Straska, in the middle of a word. He was just saying Art's look when I got him right in the mouth. In the middle of a word.
A Walk in the Sun was actually picked up by Darryl Zanuck. He thought it was a fine movie, but he wasn't that behind it because he felt once that armistice had been signed, Japan had surrendered, we were victorious in Europe, he didn't want Fox committed to any more war movies.
With the war in Europe ended and Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, the traditional war film of the 1940s disappeared from American movie screens. As production's costs skyrocketed after the war, 20th Century Fox switched to making fewer films with more adult themes. Laura, released in October 1944, Fallen Angel, Leave Her to Heaven, and Hangover Square were in the vanguard of the post-war film noir movement. Looking back, World War II was when America of the 20th century lost much of its innocence and essentially grew up.
For Darryl Zanuck, it was movies like Gentleman's Agreement. Of course, it's one of the great films about anti-Semitism in the form of John Garfield, who was in uniform. Dana Andrews would continue as a Fox star, but would make the ultimate movie about the post-war experience and the mental toll it can take for somebody else, and that was Sam Goldwyn and The Best Years of Our Lives.
There would be another virtuous film before the end of the decade. 1949's 12 O'Clock High was directed by Henry King, perhaps the director that Zanuck was most comfortable with during his long tenure at 20th Century Fox. One of the founders of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, King directed 25 films at Fox during an incredible career that stretched from 1915 to 1962. 12 O'Clock High is the apotheosis of situational military leadership. The story is related in flashback from the present by the command's former adjutant, Academy Award winner Dean Jagger, of a young general, Gregory Peck, taking command of a low-morale, high-casualty bomber group in England during the early days of World War II. This film is used by the U.S. Navy as an example of leadership styles in its Leadership and Management Training School. 12 O'Clock High offers a timeless and authentic perspective of men in combat that would not have been viable for audiences during the war.
Hollywood also was kind of roiling back with straight-up three-strip Technicolor entertainment. Musicals came back in a big, big way.
After ushering in widescreen cinemascope and big-budget spectacles, Zanuck left his beloved studio to produce films in Europe. When both Zanuck and Fox were at their lowest ebb, the aging mogul returned to the experience that had forged him in his youth: war.
His big return to 20th Century Fox was The Longest Day, the most spectacular war film made up to that point.
After Zanuck gave his all to put World War II on the screens of American movie theaters during the 1940s, the war as a dramatic theme paid him back nearly 2 decades later. For Darryl F. Zanuck and 20th Century Fox, The Longest Day provided a fitting coda to a generation of World War II films that shaped American culture during the war and for years to come.